This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, welcome Rabbi Sai. We want to do the fifth part of the series we've been doing the last couple of weeks about the history of Kabbala. We spoke about Reb Chaim Vital's very stern admonitions that nobody spread the writings of the Ari. In fact, he even confiscated all of the booklets. We read about the Cherem of the Chachmei Eretz Yisrael, who did not allow the writings of the Arizal to go beyond the confines of Eretz Yisrael. In fact, the Shlach HaKadosh says that he visited the house of Reb Chaim Vital after his Petira to Reb Shmuel Vital, and he saw the Eitz Chaim. He said that from the day the Torah was given, no sefer had ever been written like that. Then we learned another two sections. We learned the section of the story of the 600 papers. Remember the story of the 600 papers, the Tafresh Niyaros, where Reb Chaim Vital, basically he fell ill, and during this time, his brother Reb Moshe was bribed and by an individual by the name of Yehoshua ben Nun, who hired 100 Sofrim. He gave each Sofer 6 pages, and they copied over 600 pages of the writings of Reb Chaim Vital, which were then condensed into 3 books, known as the Sefer HaDrushim, Sefer HaKavanos, and Sefer HaLikutim. This all came from what is called the Madura Kama of the writings of Reb Chaim Vital. Now the truth is, when I spoke to my friend Rav Simcha Mervis, who's a manhig in Sfas, who told me some of this history. He says he told me that when the Magen Avraham quotes the Sefer HaKavanos, it does not refer to the Shar HaKavanos that we have today, but rather to the Sefer HaKavanos, which were one of the 3 original books that came from the Tafresh Niyaros. Now we're going to talk about the Madura Basra. Madura Basra is really a fantastic story, which is also not really that well known. So let's get to it. This is on page Chav Zayin in Rav Yaakov Hillel Sefer, Kisvuni L'Doros. Do you have that, page Chav Zayin? Yes. Okay. Derech Ksivas Rav Chaim Vital b'Maduros Achronos. The writing of Rav Chaim Vital in the later volumes, V'sibas Genizasam, and the reason they were hidden. Because ultimately, the Madura Basra of Rav Chaim Vital was buried. So, after Rav Chaim Vital finished writing the whole corpus of material that he received from the Ari, B'shmoinas Hasharim Shabbos-Sefer Eitz Chaim, in the 8 gates of the Sefer Eitz Chaim. The 8 gates are, by the way, the Shar HaHakdamos, Shar Mamori Rashbi, Shar Mamori Razal, Shar HaPsukim, Shar HaMitzvos, Shar HaKavanos, Shar Ruach HaKoidah, Shar HaGalgulim. However, he wrote additional volumes. Chazar al Talmuda, he reviewed his learning. V'chazar shav lichta maduras noisafas meklalos taras Rabbi Harizal. He wrote other maduras based on the teachings of the Ari. Ulam b'ksavim shniyim ilu shina ktsas darkai shenag ba b'ksivas harishonos. Ulam b'ksivas shniyim elu. During these writings, he changed his practice. What does that mean? He wrote the Drushim, expanding the ideas, clarifying the ideas, adding explanation, v'nimuk, and rationale v'tam. So in other words, he started to write in a way which added more explanation than he had previously. However, he didn't want it to be too open, so he sort of hid the meaning in between the lines. However, most of the explanations he gave were not his own. They were the explanations that Arizal taught him. Either Sha'amram b'makom acher, explanations that Arizal gave maybe in other places. In other words, he started to extrapolate a little bit, using rationales that Arizal wrote elsewhere to apply it to this place. Uvidrosh acher, Like we know, Torah is rich in one place and wealthy elsewhere. However, when Reb Chaim Vital felt, while he was writing these new volumes, whenever Reb Chaim Vital felt that something that he was writing was more explained elsewhere, he would incorporate it. In other words, if he felt that what the Arizal said here would be explained through something that Arizal said elsewhere, he would start to incorporate it into the text. And this is how he expanded and he clarified. And then he started to do something different. He started to add his own explanation. Okay? He started to add his own rationale. When he felt that a certain place, the words of Arizal were mysterious and closed, he would explain.
Did he ever disagree?
Sometimes even more. Sometimes things he had questions about in the first edition. And in the first edition, when he had a question, he would write a footnote. I have a question on this. He would be mafalpo and in the footnote. He'd try to answer it. That's what he did in the first edition. In the second edition, he wouldn't say that Arizal says this, and I asked this, and I think maybe the pshat is. He would just write what he thought the pshat was. He sort of took his understanding for granted. In other words, madura shniya already, Reb Chaim Vital began to apply some of his own understanding. In the first edition, he would quote the Ari, and the Ari is the stira to another place, and he would say an answer. In the second edition, he would just say it as he saw it. Meaning, in other words, this was his take on it. In the first edition, you knew what the Arizal said, you knew what Reb Chaim Vital asked, and you knew what Reb Chaim Vital answered. You knew what the words of the Ari were and what the words of Reb Chaim were. In volume 2 of the writings of Reb Chaim Vital, this was Reb Chaim Vital's take on the Ari. Okay. B'hinei mivad kol zeh. Shehu ba'ofen ksivase v'arichase b'pam hashniya as teres Rabbi. Besides all this, in terms of the style of the writing, Oid yesh bein bisrei kisrei hamadura basra drushim shleimim v'sugyois v'noisim she'enim ela sikumim sheksam reishal sefer Reb Chaim Vital ba'atzmai. In Madura Shniya, there were entire drashos and topics which were Reb Chaim Vital's executive summary of ideas that Arizal said. For example, the majority of Shar Pnimius v'Chitzonios, if you look in the Eitz Chaim in the Shar Mem, you'll see that Arizal never gave over to Reb Chaim Vital this style of summation. Reb Chaim Vital gathered bits and pieces from all the different times Ari spoke about it, and then he gathered it, and he conglomerated and consolidated it, and he asked, and he proved, and he arranged. So in other words, what Reb Chaim Vital did in the second volume was, he took much more liberty to organize as he saw fit, and less just to bring down the words of the Ari. Besides that, Oid Hirav Ois Benafshe Reb Chaim Vital. Reb Chaim Vital was even more courageous. Ume'al u'ma'aver l'saska richas komash guv Rabbi. Above and beyond involving himself in the Kabbalah of his Rabbi, he began to explain the words of the Zayar with a new, innovative explanation based on principles that he learned from the Arizal. In other words, now for the first time, Reb Chaim Vital is saying his own pshatim, and he would use the principles set forth by the Ari to explain the Zayar. Okay, what do we learn from here? The bottom line is that while in volume 1, Reb Chaim Vital was what is called the Safra Rabbah. He was a scribe. he wrote over what the Ari said. If he had a question, he'd write a footnote. If he had a stira, he would write on the bottom. Not so volume 2. Lo histapik heyosa sarva l'ras amalas taros rabbi aksav. Umesadroi v'orcha inyanim uchmalachta b'ksiv rishonim says Chaim. He did not just settle to be a scribe el mayata. He became a parshan, a chadshan, a yatzran, based on what he learned from his Rabbi, to expand it, to make it more rich, and obviously based on the premises that we taught him, and according to his own seichel. Now again, nothing to take away from volume 2. This in no way denigrates Mahadura Basra. It was Reb Chaim Vital. He was perfectly capable and a bar hachi to start to explain the meanings of the Ari based on his own seichel, and to add. He says, Ulamaisa, we're on page Chavtes now. And we're going to see that because Reb Chaim Vital was so courageous and daring in volume 2, he had charata. And because he had charata, he buried it so that nobody should ever see one word that he ever wrote. And as we're going to see, all of our Kabbala today, Kamat, comes from these works that Reb Chaim Vital buried. And the question is, if he buried it, so how do we have it today? Because when the Magen Avram quotes the Sefer HaKavanos, he's referring to the Madura Kama. But we don't really have that today. What we have is from this Madura Basra. So why did he hide it? And who found it? And where did they find it? Okay? Because basically all of our Kabbalah today, it's interesting, all of our Kabbalah today is unauthorized. It either comes from the 600 pages that we had to bribe Reb Chaim Vital when he was sick, or it comes from this Madura Basra. Look in page Chavtes.
Did he ever say if the Ari came to him in a palom and told him to bury it? Is Madura Basra?
We'll see. Whatever you need to know, I will tell you. Okay?
Kabbalah.
Okay.
It's hidden.
Ulamaisa ein bekach shum chesaron klal chalila. Lamaisa, there is no detraction. There's no chesaron. Dema gara chelko shel Reb Chaim Vital liyos mefarish es devei Rabbi. Why would Reb Chaim Vital be lacking in explaining the words of the Ari? Look, throughout history, many people have tried to explain the Ari. So why would Reb Chaim Vital be any less than any of the other parshanim of the Ari? Shapirshu v'chidshu saviv l'kisvei Ari. Adarabba, there is no one greater in understanding the Ari like Reb Chaim Vital. Aside from the fact that the whole transmission of the Kabbalah rested on the shoulders of Reb Chaim Vital, so there could be no better person to try to write explanations for the Torah of the Ari than Reb Chaim Vital. That's why he did it. So what did he do? Again, so Reb Chaim Vital wrote two things. He wrote the Eitz Chaim, which was the Madura Kama, and he wrote this Madura Basra. Listen to, now we're going to have a very interesting Machlokes between Rabbi Yaakov Hillel, one of the great Mekubalim today, and Rav Meir Poperush, one of the ancient Mekubalim. Why Reb Chaim Vital buried Madura Basra? What was his rationale? So Rabbi Yaakov Hillel writes, V'nei kivan shechashash Reb Chaim Vital shebekisvei Madura Basra shaloi avar al tzavas Rabbi. Since Reb Chaim Vital was choshesh that by writing Madura Basra he would violated the command of his Rebbe, V'shina es Yehudai, and he changed his promise, V'haya kinera li by noikfei b'davar, and it seemed like he felt guilty about it. Because of his great fear of heaven, he decided to hide the writings in Geniza. Shmuel Vital. He decided to leave Yerusha L'Doros in the hands of Rav Shmuel Vital. Rak es Sifra Eitz Chaim. Only his book Eitz Chaim, which was his first. In other words, the Reb Chaim Vital decided to bury everything, and he only gave over to his son the first work that he wrote, which is known as the Eitz Chaim. His son again was Reb Shmuel Vital, and which is Behekuf of a Seder V'Diak Lashon, Ashabai Ksav Divrei Rabbi, Kasa Divrei. He wrote all the words of his Rabbi, and those in the first edition is Dvarim Kaviyas and Mamish. In the first edition, Reb Chaim Vital wrote the words as Ari said it, without adding, without taking away. V'chasher kol divrei atzmei shelos aros yishuv v'chedushav, and anything he wrote was only written on the bottom, without entering the main body. Okay? So in other words, Reb Chaim Vital, in the first edition, which that he didn't bury, but that he left over for his son, the reason why that he left that over is because that was the original words of the Ari without allowing entrance to his own words. So now we have this incredible machlokes.
Let him do that. The Ari didn't prohibit him from transcribing his words.
The Ari wasn't alive. The Ari wasn't alive.
When he was alive, did he tell him that he was allowed to do that?
The Ari said that only Reb Chaim Vital is allowed to write. But they, to write on the side, we don't know what he said. V'ayin Meir Poperush. If you look in the Meir Poperush, in his Hakdama to the Derech Eitz Chaim, he says there's another reason for the Geniza, the Madura Basra. Not that Reb Chaim Vital felt guilty that he was violating the words of the Ari. Just the opposite. L'roiv oimka ignaza. He felt he wrote too deep and he was revealing too much. So to me, it's an incredible machlokes between Rabbi Yaakov Hillel and Rabbi Meir Poperush why Reb Chaim Vital buried the Madura Basra. Rabbi Yaakov Hillel says he felt guilty that he added his own haisafais to the Ari. Rabbi Meir Poperush says no, he felt he made it too deep for the people. Says Rabbi Yaakov Hillel, I will not back down. Va'ani b'mekoimi emod, I stand my place. V'tami nimuki imi, and my reason is sound. And it could be what he says, Rabbi Meir Poperush says, is included because he explained it so deeply, above and beyond what the Arizal said. That's why he hid it. Meaning, it's not just that it was too deep, but it was maybe even more than the Arizal himself was saying. Okay, so this will conclude the fifth part of the series on the history of Kabbala.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.